Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Welcome. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. Federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre blasted the Trudeau government on the carbon tax, but this time during a rally in BC. Lethbridge Conservative MP Rachel Thomas discusses the plan her party has to tackle the violent gun crimes in our major cities. And country star Paul Brandt speaks out following the arrest of another human trafficker here in Alberta.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre brought his Axe the Tax message to a large rally in Castlegar, British Columbia. Poilievre took to the social media platform X to say that the federal levy has not only been hurting the average everyday Canadian, but also a lot of business owners who have simply had enough and left Canada altogether for greener pastures in the United States.
All of the jobs, the businesses, the truckers would have to leave this country. South of the border, they have zero carbon tax. Yeah, well, you know what? You can just imagine them popping the champagne at the Trump Tower in New York if Trudeau gets in with a 61 cent a litre carbon tax, because they'll know Donald Trump will be on the phone calling our trucking companies, our factories, our mining enterprises and saying, come down south, pay no carbon tax, we'll take your money and jobs and leave the poverty behind. Already, $500 billion Canadian investment dollars have left in the last decade to build mines, factories, businesses south of the border, Canadian investment dollars creating American jobs. My friends, I want our money back.
Recent stats show that violent crime has been increasing in Canada, especially in our major cities, including Vancouver and Toronto. In October, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau talked about the effectiveness of the handgun ban his government put in place. But according to Lethbridge Conservative MP Rachel Thomas, some police organizations stepped up to counter his claim.
For example, in Toronto, the police association came out and actually said, you know, sir, Mr. Trudeau, the rates of gun crime are actually skyrocketing in comparison to what they were before the Liberals' legislation. So we're seeing where there's a disconnect. I think Trudeau is more interested in appearing like he's creating safety for Canadians than actually creating safety for Canadians. In fact, his legislation, it only worked to divide Canadians. It only worked to attack or scapegoat those individuals who use their firearms for hunting or sports shooting, or for, you know, Indigenous folks who also have rifles and often use them for hunting, et cetera, as well.
Lethbridge Conservative MP Rachel Thomas also discusses how her party, if elected, will follow through on defunding the CBC. She'll have details coming up later in our program. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is attending a couple of summits in South America that aim to improve the multilateral institutions that have drawn skepticism from the U.S. President-elect Donald Trump. Justin Trudeau is off to the APEC summit in Peru, followed by the G20 summit in Brazil this weekend. Both summits will involve meeting with other heads of government in formal meetings, along with some side conversations. Analysts say it will be key for Canada to retain strong ties with a number of countries as the looming Trump administration plans to raise tariffs, which could disrupt global trade. Contract negotiations continue between Canada Post and its union. The Canadian Union of Postal Workers says its National Executive Board has yet to decide if job action will take place. They say it all hinges on what transpires with the Crown Corporation at the bargaining table. Now, James Ball is the acting president of the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, Local 730, and he joins us from Edmonton. And he says one thing his group is fighting for is taking better care of our rural community through an expansion of services.
There are more post offices in Canada than there are Tim Hortons, and we're interested in expanding those services in those offices, where companies like Co-op and banks and John Deere have all moved to larger centers, and all this infrastructure has basically collapsed. There's still a post office. So we want to bring banking back to these communities through the post office. We want to have community centers and hubs. We want to promote additional expansions to services that can really significantly affect our communities outside of the major cities. And I think that's a really big step. Bringing jobs and employment to these small communities, I think, is a really important step that Canada Post is neglecting to take.
You know, with more and more farmers retiring, the Alberta government says it is taking action to address the issue by attracting more young people to our agriculture industry. Minister of Agriculture and Irrigation, R.J. Sigurdsson, says more funding towards education and agriculture should help. He says it starts with a new investment in 4-H Alberta.
We've partnered with the federal government to invest more than $731,000 over 5 years in 4-H Alberta programs. This investment, through the Sustainable Canadian Agricultural Partnership, will allow 4-H Alberta to expand its Intro to 4-H program, which offers experience-based learning opportunities that build connections between urban and rural youth and local farmers and ranchers. It will also fund the Agricultural Safety and Mental Health Workshop and the Spring Senior Symposium, both of which will allow youth to learn more about the importance of mental health and farm safety.
RCMP in Cochrane have arrested and charged a 47-year-old man in connection with human trafficking and other offenses dating back 20 years. Sergeant Matt Pumphrey says the investigation began when a woman came forward with a complaint last February.
In early February of this year, Cochrane RCMP initiated an investigation into potential sex trafficking. The complainant who came forward reported that she had been the victim of human and sex trafficking at the hands of a male she had met over an online dating site between the years 2004 and 2007 in Cochrane, Alberta. After a brief consensual relationship, the male began to traffic her online for monetary gain. The male exploited nude photos of the victim, placing them on an internet site where other males would then contact the site to arrange for sexual services. The male would then drive the victim to the arranged locations where he would wait and collect the money and then drive the victim to other appointments. Throughout this investigation that spanned 9 months, Cochrane RCMP General Investigation Section were able to identify other victims of this crime, and throughout their statements, were able to corroborate the allegations against this male.
It was very significant to me to hear the details of this case and that they started so many years ago. It was about 20 years ago that my wife and I were first exposed to the issue of human trafficking through a documentary that we watched. At that time, most people didn't really realize that this was even happening. And there's an awakening happening in Alberta right now. People are starting to realize across the country that the issue of human trafficking is far more prevalent than data shows.
A major incident took place here in Lethbridge at the Knights Inn on Mayor McGrath Drive on Thursday morning. Shortly after 6 a.m., Lethbridge police were called to the inn with armored vehicles and armed officers in an incident that police described as high risk. They urged the public to avoid the area. 20 minutes later, an update from LPS said that the incident was resolved and multiple people were taken into custody. An investigation is currently ongoing, and police say more details will be given out when they become available. Now, have you ever gone outside looking for your vehicle and it's not where you last parked it? You notice that it was not stolen, but something else traumatic happened to it? Well, that's exactly what happened to a married couple who live on the west side of the city here in Lethbridge. On Saturday morning, they found their SUV had moved and was severely damaged as they became victims of a hit and run. Alan Mania is the affected party and explains what took place.
Normally, my wife, she parks her vehicle on the front of the street. It was just odd because when I opened the window, it wasn't there. So I just quickly asked her, like, did you by chance lock your vehicle? Like, I thought maybe somebody had stolen it. But then as I looked to the right, I noticed her vehicle was on the neighbor's driveway. Once we approached the vehicle, we saw that the vehicle was moved like probably 30 feet. On my doorbell camera, we could see that around 3:14 a.m., we saw the vehicle ramming into the back of her vehicle. So we quickly called the police. There was a lot of damage on the rear left side, like bumper, quarter panel, and the back left door as well. So, and as well the tail light. Actually, we were just expecting a baby at the time, so we were trying to cut down on some costs. So we figured, well, your vehicle is mostly parked, you're not driving far. Let's see if we can save some money by bringing down the insurance to liability only. We can make a claim based on that. I'm assuming there's no damage to the actual structure of the car, like the chassis. So I'm assuming somewhere around 7-10K. When we were looking at the damage, we saw some green paint. It's a doorbell camera, so it takes it from the side, so we have no plate number at this point, so there's no many cameras around here. If anybody sees a greenish maybe light gray truck that has some damage on the front passenger side, close to the front quarter panel, most likely, that maybe has a loud exhaust. Maybe just come with some tips that will help us a lot.
Now, Bridge City News reached out to the Lethbridge Police Service, and they say the driver of the subject vehicle has not yet been identified, and the investigation remains open. The LPS also say so far this year, there have been 225 hit-and-run collisions reported. Wow. Lethbridge Police have charged a man and woman in connection with a carjacking on November the 10th. Just after 11:30 p.m., police responded to a verbal confrontation between the two outside of a business on Mayor McGrath Drive. The man fled and forced a driver from a person's nearby running truck, carrying the woman suspect alongside. The subject was described as driving erratically, driving the wrong way eastbound on Highway 3 and swerving through oncoming traffic at high speeds. Police were able to intercept and immobilize him into a canal on 43rd Street South and apprehended the culprit when he tried to flee on foot yet again. 33-year-old Matthew Martins and 35-year-old Tracy Christine Fontaine faced various charges and made their first court appearance earlier this week. You know, being mentally healthy is a state that we should always look for in our surroundings. Anxiety, depression, and stress are on the list of factors that affect mental health and lead to mental illness. Now, according to the Executive Director of Student Services at the University of Lethbridge, Mark Slomp, well-being is a state in which most areas of a person's life are pretty good. Slomp explains how experiences as a child impact a person's mental health as they age.
You know, childhood experiences. We know that adolescents have better mental health outcomes as adults if they've experienced warm, trusting relationships with their caregivers, you know, acceptance, love, security, those kinds of things. We know that that's the foundation for adult mental health. Definitely been an increase in child and adolescent mental health rates. We've seen that, you know, across the border, for example, with a public health advisory issued relative to child and adolescent mental health. And we see those trends in Canada also. So definitely increases in the last decade or more. So in terms of contributing factors for the higher rates of youth and adolescent mental health, some of it has to do with adverse childhood experiences, with early childhood experiences, because those things provide the foundation for adult mental health. Others have to do with social connection. We're becoming more and more socially disconnected, and that has an impact on youth and adolescent mental health as well. So there's many factors associated with this, but those are some.
According to Stats Canada, in 2022, more than 5 million Canadians experienced some form of mental health disorder. You know, it appears as though the financial deficit is shortening when it comes to running the Lethbridge and District exhibition. According to the November report from the Economic Standing Policy Committee, the LDE deficit dropped $4.2 million from the estimated annual budget of $6.4 million to $2.2 million. Officials say a number of successful events at the Agri-Food Hub and Trade Centre helped to beef up some of the monetary values, including the Farmers Market, the Livestock Expo, and Glow Lethbridge, which is on now until December the 31st. Officials say the LDE was able to book an additional 10 events this year and 12 more events, new events, for 2025. Lethbridge City Council has established a new collective agreement with more than 900 city employees represented by CUPE Local 70. The new deal will see an 11% increase in wages over the next 4 years. Officials say there will also be an increase in labor job starting rates, which will begin at $23 an hour next year. Now, in a statement, Mayor Blaine Hagan commended both parties for reaching the deal, which he says is fair to the workers and taxpayers. The union and City Council have been in active negotiations since March of 2023. On November 5th, CUPE members voted 91.7% in favor of the deal. Amid confirmation that a teen in British Columbia was hospitalized with the H5N1 avian flu, health experts say increased influenza surveillance, early detection, and vaccine preparedness are key to guarding against the potential spread of the virus. Nicole Ireland from the Canadian Press has more.
People have been hearing a lot about H5N1 avian influenza recently, and the reason we've been hearing more about it here in Canada is because we have the first case of someone in Canada contracting this virus domestically. So the next question for us here in Canada is, what are we doing to prepare in case this virus becomes a pandemic. So what we're looking at is we looked at the Public Health Agency of Canada, and they let us know that they have actually authorized 3 vaccines in the past that can be used with H5N1 avian influenza, although we do not have those here in Canada. The reason that they don't want to stockpile them, they say, is because the vaccines have a shelf life expiry date of about 2 years. But some of the health experts I talked to said that we really should have a stockpile. It doesn't have to be enough to vaccinate the entire population of Canada, but what they do want is for us to have enough, say, to vaccinate farm workers, other people who have high risk access to animals, to be able to vaccinate those workers. It's a question for Canada on whether we want to be proactive on this and be ready with vaccination.
The Saskatchewan government says their legislature will reconvene on November the 25th. The sitting is to last 2 weeks, allowing for debate and passage of the throne speech and the introduction of new legislation. The new session begins after the Saskatchewan Party won its 5th straight majority government, but with a reduced seat count. Premier Scott Moe named his new cabinet last week with several new faces around the table and many veteran MLAs with new portfolios. Overseas, Super Typhoon Yagi swept through northern Vietnam on September the 7th. Entire villages were devastated by landslides and severe flooding. Around 200 lives were lost and more than 100,000 people were displaced from their homes. This is the story of how the Christian relief agency Samaritan's Purse brought hope and emergency relief supplies when they were needed the most.
Nhà em thì tối hôm thấy 2 giờ đêm thì đang có ngủ thì tự nhiên thấy nổ một phát như phát mìn ấy, là đất hết, nhảy xuống nhà, cả 3 ông bà cháu đang ngủ, thế là cũng ôm nhau chạy nhảy qua trước cửa được, thấy đất về may còn nhảy kịp, xong rồi cũng tất tật đó, chả có cầm được cái gì đâu.
Ở mới sập hết, là tất cả các thứ của gia đình nhà em, tài sản ở trong này là mất hết ạ. Em cảm thấy là bao nhiêu năm vợ chồng tích góp mới làm được căn nhà nho nhỏ mà không may ta là bão lũ đến rồi sập hoàn toàn, nhà em không còn cái gì ạ.
During this distribution, we're reaching 6,400 families in 3 provinces who have been affected by the floods and landslide that followed Storm Yagi. These supplies include hygiene kits, food kits, kitchen kits, water filters, solar lights, and blankets. In many places that we're going right now, they cannot come to the distribution site, so we try to bring the supplies to them one by one. This family was one of them. They were heavily affected by the landslide, but they couldn't get to the distribution site at the commune center. So we just brought some supplies here, and we hope the supplies will bring hope and relief to their family.
Hôm nay được các đoàn với các anh chị đến thì tặng cho em những món quà này thì đều là rất là hữu ích và cần thiết đối với vợ chồng em trong lúc này ạ. Em xin cảm ơn tổ chức Samaritan's Purse rất nhiều ạ.
Thế và trong những cái thời khắc khó khăn nhất thì Hội Liên hiệp Phụ nữ tỉnh Yên Bái cũng rất là biết ơn khi mà nhận được những cái gói quà cứu trợ của tổ chức Samaritan cũng rất kịp thời.
Thank you for your support, and please continue to pray for our team and the people affected here in Vietnam.
And thank you, God, for the helping hand of Samaritan's Purse. Well, here in southwestern Alberta, it was mainly overcast but quite mild, and things will be cooling off slightly over the next few days. A full look at the weather picture is on deck. You know, with all of the wind we've been experiencing lately here in Lethbridge, I'm surprised that there's still some leaves left on the trees. Tonight, expect more gusty winds with a low near -1. Now, Friday, we should see some sunshine mixed with clouds and a high near 7 degrees. The clouds should clear out just in time for the weekend. Expect sunshine and 6 degrees for Saturday, warming up to a balmy 12 degrees on Sunday. Monday, the mercury will drop off by quite a bit to around 3 degrees. Even cooler under a mainly cloudy sky on Tuesday with a high of only -1. Wednesday, improving to 6 degrees under a partly cloudy sky. Now, checking the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 4 degrees with an average low of -8. The record high was 18 degrees set way back in 1953, and the record low, a very cold -29 set back in 1911. The sun rose at 8:43 and sets at 5:48. Let's see how Friday is shaping up across our home and native land now in Canada. Expect clouds mixed with sunshine along the west coast. It should be 9 degrees in Victoria and just 1 degree cooler in Vancouver. Calgary should be mainly cloudy tomorrow with a high of 3 degrees. Expect light flurries and then a high of +2 for Edmonton later in the day. Regina should be mainly sunny with a high near 6 degrees. Rain and a high of +2 degrees for Saskatoon on Friday, and mainly clear sky and a high of 9 degrees is on tap for Winnipeg. Now over in the central part of the country, expect an overcast day with a high of 9 degrees in Toronto, mainly clear with a high of 6 degrees in our nation's capital in Ottawa. Sunshine and 7 is on tap for Montreal on Friday. In Atlantic Canada, expect showers with a high of 7 degrees in Fredericton, rain and 11 degrees for both Halifax and Charlottetown, and in St. John's, showers with a high of 11 degrees as well for Friday. Tesla is recalling more than 2,400 Cybertrucks due to a faulty driver inverter component. According to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration in the United States, more than 57,000 Cybertrucks have been recalled since the beginning of the year. That's an average of around 172 vehicles per day. In total, there have been 5 recalls affecting the truck. Now, one of the recalls last April involved the accelerator pedal, which was in danger of either breaking off or getting stuck if high force was applied. Kelly Blue Book hinted that the pickup had a recall rate of just over 194% by the end of the third quarter. Looks like Formula One racing is returning to the Las Vegas Strip, and race day preparations are well underway now. Barricades and race equipment are slowly taking over the iconic strip for one of the few city circuits on the F1 calendar. Race days are November 21st through the 23rd.
In 1 week, Formula One enthusiasts will descend on the world's most incredible destination to merge the thrill and speed of Formula One with the iconic Las Vegas Strip in the heart of the entertainment and sports capital of the world. As one of the few city circuit races in the worldwide Formula One racing schedule, these race cars will travel throughout our 3.8-mile track through 17 turns, 50 laps at speeds of more than 200 miles per hour.
We spent countless hours with all of our partners that you see here today in the planning for the safety of our spectators, the drivers, the pedestrians on the strip, and everyone that's going to be in the area during the race. And this year, we have worked with the Las Vegas Grand Prix to install safety enclosures and barriers inside all of the pedestrian bridges, both on the public side and on the private side. And these enclosures are upgrades from the safety film, if you remember that from last year.
A new study says Alberta's favorite coffee is flat white. That was followed by espresso. Now, the research done by Casinos Hunter looked at the 74 most popular coffee orders placed at 13 Canadian provinces. In total, flat white coffee had 19,002 average monthly searches. As mentioned, espresso was number 2 with 7,227 average monthly searches. Number 3 on the list was cappuccino with 2,981 monthly searches, latte with 2,805, and French press rounded out the top 5 with 2,372 average monthly searches. Love your coffees. Now here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 60 points on the day to finish at 25,049. The Dow was down 207 points to 43,750. The S&P 500 was down 36 on the day to 5949, and the Nasdaq was down 123 points to 19,107. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 21 cents to 68.64 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 15 cents to 276 US. Gold was down 33.38 on the day to 25.6454 US an ounce, and silver was down 27 cents to $30.44 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.16 per bushel, barley's at $6.27, canola's at $14.58, and corn is at $7.46 per bushel. Live cattle December contract was down $1.08 to $182.95. Feeder cattle were down $1.75 to $264.05. And lean hogs December contract was down $1.78 to $80.10. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to 71.20 US. Recapping one of our top stories, Lethbridge City Council has established a new collective agreement with more than 900 city employees represented by CUPE Local 70. The new deal will see an 11% increase in wages over the next 4 years. The union and city council have been in active negotiations since March of 2023. On November 5th, the CUPE members voted 91.7% in favor of the agreement. The latest polls show the federal Conservatives have a 20-point lead over the Trudeau Liberals. Can they maintain that lead heading into the next federal election? Lethbridge Conservative MP Rachel Thomas has her thoughts on the subject matter and will share them with us shortly. Listen, when you see news happening in your community, be sure to drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. Also, be sure to visit our website anytime to check out a number of stories and interviews. You know, many Canadians are quite concerned that an emissions cap on Canadian energy will not only kill jobs in Canada, but send many of those jobs to the United States. Now, to chat about this in more detail is Lethbridge Conservative MP Rachel Thomas, who joins us from her home in Lethbridge. Now, Rachel, even Canada's former Finance Minister, Bill Morneau, says the cap on our energy sector is just not a good idea.
Yeah, Hal, I think, look, at the end of the day, Canada produces oil and gas in an incredibly responsible manner. It's an industry that we should be proud of. It provides high-paying jobs while supplying a commodity that we need and the world needs. And so for Guilbeault, the Liberals, to come out and now want to apply a supposed cap on emissions, it really is actually not so much a cap on emissions, but actually it's a cap on jobs. It's a cap on, a high-paying jobs that Canadians depend on. It's a cap on Canada being able to meet its potential in terms of output and generating dollars that would go into building roads and schools and bridges and critical infrastructure that Canadians depend on. Ultimately, that is what this is a cap on. It's a cap on our prosperity as a nation and as the individual people who live here and call this place home. So make no mistake, this policy is going to do very little, if anything, to protect the environment. We already have some of the world's best environmental policies in place when it comes to oil and gas. This is simply just another Liberal attack on the people of this country who work incredibly hard.
Premier Daniel Smith and the UCP have also hinted that they may be suing the federal government once again over this potential emissions cap. They want to be 35% less than the 2019 levels. What are your thoughts?
I commend Premier Smith on her advocacy for the people of Alberta. She's certainly wanting to make sure that they have every opportunity to thrive. And so her gumption to be able to go up against the establishment in Ottawa and to defend the interests of our province, I think is the right thing. I believe that she is acting in the best interest of those that have elected her. She clearly has a mandate to act in the way that she is. And I think that, should she be successful, it will definitely serve Albertans well.
Now, we've heard your leader, Pierre Poilievre, say time and time again that after 9 years of this Liberal NDP government, millions more Canadians are now going to food banks because they're having a really tough time making ends meet. Now, Poilievre says he has a plan to help Canadians meet their basic needs. Rachel, what does that plan really look like for your party?
Yeah, look, we know that Canadians are worse off than they have been in at least 40 years. And of course, that's due to the government that's currently in place, led by Prime Minister Trudeau. Unfortunately, he's just made decisions to spend carelessly. And as a result, inflation has been driven up, interest rates have been driven up. And as a result, Canadians are paying more than ever before. I'm hearing from people who are coming into my office who, they're having to make difficult decisions between paying their utility bill or paying for food or properly feeding their families. In terms of a Conservative plan, our plan is really common sense. If you rein in the spending and you make sure that you're responsible, spending within your means only, then of course that reduces inflation. Further to that, we would be introducing a dollar for dollar rule. So if we're going to spend an extra dollar, then we have to find a dollar of savings when we're in government. And I think as well, we've made it very clear that we intend to scrap the carbon tax. That'll be our first order of business when we form government. And we know that this is costing Canadians, a ton of money. It's adding to their gas bill, their grocery bill, their utilities bill. Everything costs more because of the carbon tax. So, of course, we look forward to taking an axe to that and getting rid of it altogether for all time.
Yeah, let's talk a bit about that carbon tax for a moment here, Rachel. Many would argue that it has been very hurtful to a number of Canadians, from farmers to the truckers who deliver our food. In fact, a recent report by the Parliamentary Budget Officer also says that even with rebate checks that Ottawa is dishing out, overall Canadians are spending much more than we're actually getting back. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, certainly. Again, that's, the PBO, the Parliamentary Budget Officer affirmed that Canadians are worse off with the carbon tax. We know that in the province of Alberta, after rebate, Albertans are still paying about $700 more for the carbon tax than they would be if we didn't have it. And so again, this is just another example where this government is out of touch with the reality of Canadians and actually putting policy in place that's incredibly punitive in nature. Canadians deserve better. Canadians deserve hope. They deserve prosperity. They deserve opportunity. And common sense conservatives are committed to doing that. And again, it starts with step one, which is to axe the carbon tax.
Now, since being elected south of the border, Donald Trump says he's bringing forth legislation to have millions of illegal immigrants deported. And some believe a number of those illegal immigrants who've not been vetted properly will make their way to Canada. Some of those illegal immigrants having criminal records, maybe even jihadists. Should we really be concerned here in our country about a lot of those illegals making their way over across the border?
The first order of any government should be the safety and security of its citizens. Which means ultimately securing our borders and making sure that immigration processes are followed properly. Canada has an incredibly robust and compassionate immigration system traditionally. Under this government, however, it has been absolute chaos. And so unfortunately, we have seen many illegal immigrants come into the country, and some of those individuals pose a threat. So just recently, we know that there were 2 former ISIS fighters who came into this country and they were granted citizenship. And they went on to then plot a terrorist attack in Toronto. It was discovered then that one of these individuals actually dismembered someone in 2015 with a sword and then posted it on media for people to see. That's very blatant. That's very obvious that that individual should not have been granted citizenship. So, Canadians are asking, well, what is the vetting process? Why was this individual not, not caught? Why was this not known? How did this individual end up being granted an opportunity to come to Canada, let alone become a citizen of this country? And so clearly there's a great deal of work that needs to be done with regards to how people are vetted and allowed to take the oath of citizenship in this country. And I think Canadians are rightly concerned with how things are going right now under Trudeau, and they're certainly asking for change. And so as Conservatives, we're committed to restoring our immigration system to what it once was, which was, a system that was based on fairness, a system that was based on rules and procedures and protocols, and ultimately a system that served our country well economically.
So, Rachel, many Canadians are also quite concerned over Donald Trump's protectionist policies. Buy American, American jobs first. It's understandable. He's the leader of that country. But if your party forms government in the next federal election, how will you really work with Donald Trump to ensure that he doesn't go ballistic with tariffs, including on our softwood lumber?
Yeah, it's certainly a good question. We know that, President Trump has every intention of making sure that he protects the interests of America. At the same time, here in Canada, we should have a leader who's advocating for the best interests of Canadians. Unfortunately, under Trudeau, we don't have that. But the good news is an election is coming and we will form a new government under Pierre Poilievre. And he does have the interest of Canadians in mind. And so I think with that, we're wanting to scrap the carbon tax because we know that it's causing jobs to go south of the border. We know that it's penalizing us. In addition to that, we're looking to make sure that people are able to bring home powerful paychecks, and we're looking to make sure that jobs are saved and ultimately to stand up for the interests of Canadians. Part of that is reaching out and building a relationship with Trump and his administration. And I think, we are already putting a plan in place in terms of what that might look like.
Now, another question I have for you is the federal government here in Canada has been giving billions of dollars to Ukraine in their fight against Russia. Many of us very definitely want to support Ukraine as Russia has invaded that country, a sovereign nation. But then a lot of other Canadians are saying, why not help Canadians here at home first? Our veterans, our homeless, those battling addictions. Why not keep the money here internally in our country and help millions of Canadians first before sending off so many billions of tax dollars to other nations? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's certainly a difficult predicament that we find ourselves in. As a country, we've committed to being generous in humanitarian efforts and of course, supporting our allies. And so we have contributed to the efforts, in particular toward Ukraine. Um, at the same time, we certainly have Canadians who are struggling here, whether it's with mental health or with addiction, with homelessness, and those needs also need our attention. So I think these are the difficult conversations that we need to continue having at a leadership level, but also leaning in and listening closely to Canadians and making sure that we know where they stand on these issues and then acting accordingly.
Now, the latest polls show the Conservative Party of Canada has close to a 20-point lead over the Trudeau Liberals. Rachel, how can you really maintain that momentum heading into the next election? Or do we have to maybe wait until Jagmeet Singh qualifies for his pension before heading to the polls?
Well, obviously Pierre Poilievre has been working very, very hard as the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. He's out every single day meeting with regular folks and making sure that he's hearing their stories and understanding their experiences. He's someone who has great stamina and a great passion for this country and its people. And so you asked the question, can that be maintained? Absolutely, it can, because it comes from the very core of his being. He loves the nation of Canada and he's passionate about making sure that the people are served well. He's also incredibly hardworking and he has smart policy. And so coming forward with good options for Canadians, I think is really what's going to help him as we continue to prepare for the next election and, of course, earn the trust of Canadians.
Why do you think a lot of Conservative policies have really been resonating in Liberal strongholds, traditional strongholds like Toronto? I mean, especially winning that Toronto by-election. Why do you think that's happening more in central Canada now?
Yeah, for sure. Again, I think it has to do with the fact that, Pierre Poilievre, as the leader of the Conservatives, is putting his feet on the ground and really listening to folks. He's having conversations with regular individuals, whether it's at gas stations or grocery stores or workplaces. He's engaging with people where they're at and taking the time to understand what they're concerned about. And so as Conservatives, I believe that we've prioritized those things that matter most to Canadians. We're committed to axing the tax. We're committed to building homes, which we know is much needed. We're committed to fixing the budget, which we know is totally out of control and causing inflation like never before. And we're committed to stopping the crime, which we know is running rampant and it's causing people to feel unsafe because, quite frankly, they are unsafe because there's crime that is just skyrocketing. And so that needs to be taken care of. And so I think these are the issues that matter most to Canadians, and they're the issues that we're responding to as Conservatives.
Yeah, let's talk about gun crime. And we've seen a huge increase across the country, especially in major centers like Toronto and Vancouver over the last few years. What approach would your party take differently compared to the Liberals in addressing so many of the violent crimes here in Canada?
Yeah, we know that violent gun crime is up by 116%. So it's skyrocketed. We know that this is having an impact on the safety and well-being of communities, and it's not it's not just some communities. It really is all communities across the country are affected by this, at least in some way. Mr. Trudeau came out just a couple of weeks ago bragging about his handgun ban and the legislation that he's put in place with regards to firearms. At the end of the day, we know that legislation actually only went against those who legally own their firearm and use their firearm responsibly. It didn't go after criminals. And the reason we know that is because actually multiple police associations came out and actually attacked Trudeau on his claim. They actually wanted to clear the record. They wanted to set it straight. So for example, in Toronto, the police association came out and actually said, sir, Mr. Trudeau, the rates of gun crime are actually skyrocketing in comparison to what they were before the Liberals' legislation. So we're seeing where there's a disconnect. I think Trudeau is more interested in appearing like he's creating safety for Canadians than actually creating safety for Canadians. In fact, his legislation, it only worked to divide Canadians. It only worked to attack or scapegoat those individuals who use their firearms for hunting or sports shooting, or for Indigenous folks who also have rifles and often use them for hunting, et cetera, as well. That's not an effective law. At the end of the day, Canadians are not safer because of Trudeau. They're actually put into greater harm.
Now, you've been quite critical of the Trudeau government in the past, saying that censorship has increased exponentially with bills such as C-18 and I believe C-11. Can you explain how these bills are, quote, suffocating the Canadian public?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Look, free speech is an issue that I am extremely passionate about because if you do not have free speech, the foundations of democracy are under attack. It is that fundamental. And so Bill C-18 actually attacks the freedom of Canadians in terms of their ability to access the news that they would wish to access. So essentially what Trudeau did is under the Liberals, they put law in place that basically favors the big broadcasters and puts other media companies at risk of even existing. It also prevents Canadians from being able to access news on places like Facebook or Instagram, et cetera, which of course Canadians depend on those spaces for the exchange of news. C-18 is something that definitely favors the large corporate news entities in exchange for going after the small ones and essentially putting them in the ground. Or a nail in the coffin, some might say. And so I have huge concerns there with regards to freedom of choice and of course the opportunity that Canadians have to be able to access different sources. With regards to Bill C-11, ultimately what this does is it breaks your search bar. You think that you're going online and looking for one thing, but actually the government is rerouting you to what they want you to see. So ultimately it puts the government in the driver's seat in terms of what you can see or say or hear online, which is very scary.
Now, your leader, Pierre Poilievre, says he wants to defund the CBC, Rachel. Now, do you back him on this, or is it just for English TV programming?
Well, look, so when it comes to the CBC, they receive $1.4 billion from Canadian taxpayers. And we know that despite receiving that lofty amount of money, we know that viewership is down. We know that trust is down. We know that ad revenue is down. And we know that despite this abysmal performance, that Catherine Tate, the CEO of the CBC, determined that the executives should get $18 million worth of bonuses. This is crazy. This is crazy. Of course, Canadians are upset by this. So to answer your question directly, Pierre Poilievre has been very clear. We intend to defund the CBC. We also intend, however, to keep Radio Canada because we understand its importance in certain places within Canada where it's more difficult to access news. And so we want to make sure that in those remote areas and in Quebec that access is granted. But make no mistake, in terms of the CBC, it will be defunded.
Conservative MP Rachel Thomas, thanks so much for your time today and for joining us from your home in Lethbridge.
Thank you, Hal. Good to be with you.
A lot of folks enjoy reading the Old Farmer's Almanac, and some swear by its famous weather predictions. Joining us today to chat more about this is Carol Conair. She is the editor-in-chief of the Old Farmer's Almanac Canadian edition. Carol, it's great to have you with us. Welcome to Bridge City News.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So let's get started. For anyone not familiar with your publication, how would you best describe the Old Farmer's Almanac?
Oh, old and new. You know, we have the old in our name, but we have tons of new stuff every year. So I think that's what's kept us around for 233 years is that we have this great blend of tried and true, but also what is the newest stuff out there? What are we curious about?
233 years. Wow, that's really impressive. So let's talk about the weather now, and let's get right into the nitty-gritty. Bad news first. You say cold for Ontario and eastern Manitoba?
Ooh, you're really one of the few areas in North America we're seeing snow cover and cold most of the winter season. That's what our prediction is.
And Saskatchewan won't have the mountains of snow, but some cold temperatures?
Absolutely. I was looking and the cold snaps are so frequent. We're saying, let me read my notes here, early and late December, early and late January, and mid and late February. That's kind of all winter.
Wow. And now southern Alberta, which is where we are right now, let's talk about your prediction there as well as southern BC. Also below average temperatures, but it's interesting that you predict that the very southern areas of Alberta, which is where we are, we will have a wet winter that isn't so cold.
We are saying wet, more precipitation overall. So it depends. If you get snow, you're going to see snow. You know, I think it's kind of a sense of how warm will it be? I mean, all those cold snaps, that we're seeing really in the central part, really into the plains, all the way into, the US. That's what we're calling for the most snow. And then yes, mild and wet pretty much everywhere else. As you go further east, there are some drier spots in Canada, but even as you go out to the Maritimes, wet again.
So then let's talk about the Maritimes and Quebec. And what's the outlook for Quebec, Newfoundland, and the other maritime provinces?
All the way east, we're saying really, really wet and precipitation. But if you're going inland, as you go inland, there's the chance for more snow. But yeah, it's a milder winter overall, really, for North America, except for kind of the very heart of our landmass, where we'll see cold. It's because of the jet stream. It's wavier, it's slower, and those cold blasts have a good shot at coming down quite a few times during the winter.
Now, it seems that there's some times where the Old Farmer's Almanac and what, say, like Environment Canada would predict, or like what they forecast, kind of clash. Are there different models that the Old Farmer's Almanac uses? Maybe you could explain some of that.
Oh, absolutely. Well, we're kind of crazy, right? Trying to predict long range weather over a year in advance when people trying to predict it tomorrow don't always get it right. So there's that. But I think the main thing that differentiates us from pretty much all other long range weather forecasting is how much emphasis we put on magnetic storms on the sun. Those solar storms. Lots of people further south than ever before seeing the aurora borealis. That's the cycles of storms on the sun. It's hitting its peak. It just is peak of 25, and then the cycle 26. Those are 11-year cycles, and we have 25 years of records, which is an incredible set of data. And so it's not like magnetic storm, hot summer, right? It affects many aspects of what affects our weather. But what we are able to do is go back through time and layer that incredible information on top of climate science and meteorology, and just look for those patterns. And that is essentially what we do with our long range forecasting.
And let's talk a little bit more about those solar storms, because North America has been treated to some really wonderful, spectacular light shows up in the sky this year, and most recently in the last couple of weeks. How are these solar storms impacting our climate or our way of living? Is it causing any disruptions with technology, cell phones, anything like that? Anything that you could share on these solar storms?
Sure. Well, this has just been an incredibly active end to a cycle, really a record breaker in that way. And typically what happens, after the peak, it will rest down. The magnetic storms will dissipate on the sun. And yes, we have seen, I don't think most recently we've seen this, but in some of those intense storms earlier this year, there's little bits of the grid that might get a blast and knock out. And so we do see some impacts that way. I think overall, the weather patterns that we're seeing that, partially are caused by this magnetic cycle on the sun, just a whole lot more water in the atmosphere, right? These tropical storms are dumping more water when they come onto land, and also really short duration but heavy rainfall, where we've seen some of that flooding. And so that intensity is part of this cycle. So hopefully, now that we're going to be past peak on those storms, we'll move into a quieter time weather-wise.
Well, that's great to hear. I'm sure the people down south will be pleased to hear that they're not going to see such intense hurricanes like we saw some record-breaking hurricanes this year.
Right, we hope.
We hope. Now, last year when we interviewed Jack Burnett, he's the managing editor of the Old Farmer's Almanac, he said we could expect to see a dry winter last winter. How accurate were last year's predictions?
Well, we was really accurate around where I am, and we do our accuracy in every issue. You can look in every issue, and we list cities, and so you can see where you are. If you find a city close to you, how we did. So it really is dependent on where you are. We might get 100% in your area, and really be on the nose, precipitation and temperature. Lots of places. 2 years ago, for instance, we had a lot of indiscrepancies with that precipitation. There was just a lot more generally, and so we've tweaked our our forecast to take that into consideration and look more closely at that. And again, with a warming world, we're just continually having to tweak our temperatures up. Canada released almost all of its new normals. The US did a few years ago. So we're working on a later data set, 1990 to 2020 or so. But even those aren't quite capturing because of the two warmest summers really on record this year and last.
Now, the Old Farmer's Almanac is not just about weather. It also includes a variety of interesting articles. Can you share a bit about the endangered cattle breeds? Because I had no idea about this.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite stories. Comeback cows. Yes, and so we were looking at cattle breeds that are really making a comeback in Canada. There's a Speckle Park is a breed from let's see, that's from Alberta, right? And so things that we've learned about these breeds is that they have a lot of resiliency, just like heirloom tomatoes. Say they might be more resistant to blight. Well, these animals, heritage breeds, often had to do three things: plow, make milk, and feed the owner. And so those are really wonderful qualities today, and we're finding they might have natural resistance to things like hoof disease, or just be able to survive on a better variety of feed that isn't a monoculture. So lots of advantages with these heritage breeds, and the fact that Canadian breeders are bringing them back so successfully is a great news story.
And you also take a look at whether planet Earth is on a collision course with a collection of space rubble?
Right, I wrote that one. Yeah, Bennu. I became, let's say, fascinated by this near asteroid. It's not going to hit us, so that's the good news. Jazz hands. But what's really cool about it is it's very close to us. And last September, we went and we came back with dirt from it. And so this incredible set of studies is going on now. And the interesting thing about Bennu is that it was likely created very close to when the Earth was created. So we can get some information there, more information hopefully about the creation of our own planet, because this has been hanging around for 400 million years and has got some of the same stuff that we do.
Okay, so that's good news. There's no giant asteroid heading towards Earth. There's no Armageddon situation here, because I don't even know if Bruce Willis and Ben Affleck are available for that. Now, many of us are cat lovers. Not me, I'm team dog. But there's an article on understanding and interpreting the curious behaviors of cats. Can you share some examples of some strange behaviors and what they actually mean?
Right. Well, I can't give away all of our secrets, but it's a wonderful story. Yeah, cats, you know how they knead or making biscuits, it's called. What is that for? There's a few reasons. They might, sometimes it's just a stress relief thing. It's a natural thing for them to exercise their paws. What is catnip really doing? We tell you about that. Blepping is this sort of like little thing they do with their tongue. Again, several reasons. It might be a stress thing. It might be just some fun they're having. So we give you lots of those facts about cats. We kind of had to do that because we did dogs a few years ago, and the cat lovers, as you well know, we heard from them. So there's our cats.
So when the cat is doing this is called making biscuits?
Yeah, making biscuits.
Where did that come from?
Yeah. I know, right? Cat lovers have a lot of time on their hands to say cute things.
And I also heard when a cat, like, say, brings you like a dead animal, it actually doesn't think you're eating enough, and so it's trying to help you. Is that true?
Yeah, and it's very proud of its catch. Like, they're hunters, right? So they want their owner to know, look what I got for you. You shouldn't be so hungry all the time.
That's interesting, because we were just talking about that in the office the other day too, about when a cat brings you a dead animal. Now, I also noticed that the Old Farmer's Almanac has a set of tables to follow for planting crops and veggies. And apparently moon cycles can have effect on growth. Tell me more about that.
Absolutely. So, where you are, you probably don't see too many tides, but the truth is, we know that the moon affects water, affects our oceans, but it also affects water we can't see. The ground has water in it. Plants are 90% water. We're about 60% water. And so what's that doing? And the idea, of course, in 1792, every other person was a farmer, and boy, they wanted any leg up, to make sure their crops worked. And our founder, Robert B. Thomas, was an astronomer, and like many, he looked to the sky for reasons and seasons, and the idea about the moon. So it's very simple it's in a nutshell. If you are growing above ground crops, things that really need to do their business above ground, like lettuces and corn or beans, peas, things that climb, do that in a waxing moon as the moon is growing in its intensity of light because the water's being drawn up. And a waning moon, right? A waning moon, now the water comes back down right into the earth. So root crops, you want to transplant something, your garlic, your onions, potatoes, beets, those things are underground. And so it's helpful. The water being drawn back into the earth by the moon receding in light, right? In the waning, lets those crops really dig in.
That's really interesting because I have a few plants around my home and I water them, but sometimes they just don't survive. And I think that's the reason why I don't have kids, is because if I can't make a plant survive, what chances do I have with a kid? But maybe I should read the Old Farmer's Almanac and get some tips on how to take care of the plants in my home.
I think we can definitely tell you how to take care of plants, but we're not going to tell you how to take care of kids. Though in a lot of historic almanacs, we do talk about parenting, but I don't think as the editor I would touch that one right now.
Okay, and then in our last couple minutes here, what is the overall Canadian summer weather prediction looking like?
Oh, it's different in a few different places. We're calling for the U.S. hot and dry, and so parts of Canada the same. But again, it's kind of depends on where you are. Some of the coastal areas are going to be seeing more rain than others, and I think the further north you go, we have some rain predictions there. But overall, where you are, we're calling for a cool and wet summer in the Alberta area.
Great. Carol Conaire is the editor-in-chief of the Old Farmer's Almanac Canadian Edition, available at www.almanac.com. Carol, thank you so much for sharing these interesting stories and weather predictions with us.
Thanks for having us.
I'm Naveen Day. On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, thanks for watching.